So the turbines are being returned in the hopes that the gas supply to Germany increases. Isn't it thus the case that your government is banking on the goodwill of a president who's waged war on a peaceful neighbor?
I think, I want to start out by being very clear that Canada's support for Ukraine and the Ukrainian people is unwavering. We have continually been there to support them financially with humanitarian assistance, military equipment, military training, as well as ongoing financial loans. And it's well known that we are in the top 5 or 6 supporters of Ukraine. It's regularly recognized by the NATO Secretary General. And obviously that will continue. Canadians have spoken long and hard to each other and to the government to remind us that we want to stand not only with Ukraine, but with the international rules-based order, and to ensure that a bully like Putin is never rewarded and is always challenged. And so Canada will be doing that with our allies. We don't do that alone. And so obviously we are attempting to find a way it was a very difficult decision. Germany sent a turbine to be refurbished by Siemens. The only place in the world to have that turbine refurbished was here in Canada, in Montreal. And it was a heavy decision that the government made to find a way to both keep in step with our allies. Germany is a very important ally to ensure that they have the power to do the work they need to do in Germany, and also helping Ukraine. And we obviously knew that Ukraine would not accept this easily, but we will continue that conversation with Ukraine and continue to support Ukraine in every way possible.
But is it not the case that you're betting on the goodwill of, as you call him, a bully?
Well, I think that what we've done is we've looked at all of the options possible, and recognizing that the current gas supply that Russia gives to Europe is part of the ongoing need for those people, and we'll continue to find ways to help that. We recognize, however, that dependency on Russian oil and gas needs to come to an end. Minister Wilkinson has been very clear that Canada is supportive of finding ways for Europe to wean away from the dependency on Russia. But what Russia has done is weaponized oil and energy sources. That's what they've done. What we're trying to do is take the steam out of that. We're trying to make sure that we cannot be blamed and no one else can be faulted for that supply of gas to Europe. And so by sending that turbine back, we rob him of that ability, and it's squarely on his shoulders to ensure that gas continues to flow. We can't guarantee anything. Let's be very clear. Mr. Putin has proven himself to be irresponsible. He's proven himself to be disrespectful of international law and obligations. He continues to do that. However, Canada isn't that player, and Canada will do our part to ensure that we find a way to make sure that we're doing 2 things: helping Ukraine defend itself against an illegal invasion, at the same time as ensuring that Russia is not able to blame Canada for a lack of energy to Europe. And we'll continue to stand with Europe as well. They're our allies, they're partners in defending Ukraine, and we'll do that. I will repeat, this is not an easy decision, but we actually welcome the opposition giving the ministers an opportunity to explain themselves. And Minister Joly and Minister Wilkinson will be before committee. We welcome that, and they'll explain this to Canadians, as will the ambassador from Ukraine with her objections, I'm sure, and the ambassador from Germany and the EU give their point of view on this, and to show Canadians why this was a necessary decision, and really, if not a good decision, the best decision possible given the circumstances we're in.
Tough as it is, though, isn't it ultimately a lesson to Vladimir Putin about how little discomfort he needs to inflict or even threaten in order to get Western nations to back down on their own sanctions?
Well, I think actually one of the opposition MPs today, Stéphane Bergeron, made a very important point at our special committee meeting when he said that this should never be allowed to be a divisive part. What our allies have been, maybe uniquely in recent history, totally united in our defense of freedom and responsibility and Ukraine and the Ukrainian people. That's where we are. And right now, he's attempting to wedge us. He's doing that in every possible way. We're taking the steam out of that and making sure that we're able to stand with our allies to defend Ukraine. Not an easy decision. We recognize that Ukraine sees it in a different way. We also, I was just at the Ukraine Recovery Conference in Switzerland last week, where 40 or 50 countries got together to discuss what we need to do to help Ukraine now, in the short term, the medium term, and the long term. There were shout outs to Canada regularly. Shout out to Canada from the Prime Minister of Ukraine, from the President of Ukraine, from ministers to remind us that we are one of their key allies and will continue to be that way. It reminds us that all countries need to wean themselves away from fossil fuels.
I'm just going to jump a little bit ahead here
because we all have to get away from that.
Because we're running short on time. But since this decision became public, has the Prime Minister or Deputy Prime Minister spoken with Ukraine's president?
I don't know that case. I know that there is a regular conversation between our Prime Minister, our Deputy Prime Minister, and the highest-ranking officials in Ukraine. That is a regular conversation. I don't know what has happened in the last few days. I do know that Minister Joly is also in a regular, constant conversation with her ally. I just don't know about recently what has happened. I know I had meetings with 2 Ukrainian ministers last week. And each of them were they're going to push Canada. They're going to ask for more, as they should, but they're also extremely grateful for the support the Canadians are giving Ukraine at this very difficult time for them.
All right, we'll leave it at that for now. Thanks for taking the time today.
Thank you, and thanks for your interest in the ongoing story of Ukraine's fight for their life.
Rob Oliphant is the Parliamentary Secretary for the Minister of Foreign Affairs. Now, for more on this, opposition MPs are here. Michael Chong is the Conservative Foreign Affairs critic, and Heather McPherson is the NDP's Foreign Affairs critic and Deputy Whip. Hello to both of you.
Good afternoon.
Hello.
Michael Chong, I'd like to begin with you. Canada's close allies are in support of the decision made by the Canadian government. You know, the US is on side, Germany is on side, the EU Commission. This is a decision your colleague, Mr. Genus, describes as, quote, a slap in the face to Ukrainians. Does the Conservative Party think Canada should break with NATO allies in this moment of crisis?
Well, Paul, I think NATO allies are putting a brave face of unity on what is a very bad decision. The fact is that Canada's decisions have led us to this point. Germany has been desperate to get out of its reliance on Russian gas. In fact, the German Chancellor announced, Olaf Scholz, shortly after the invasion of February 24th, earlier this year, that Germany would begin the emergency construction of 2 offshore LNG natural gas terminals in the Baltic Sea in order to replace Russian gas with gas from other countries. The German economic minister has said in recent weeks that Germany expects those 2 new LNG terminals to be operational by early 2023, early next year. The Canadian government, on the other hand, has not shown the same sense of urgency in stepping up to the plate to approve energy infrastructure here in Canada that would allow us to ship Canadian natural gas to Germany to replace Russian natural gas. So I think that is the heart of the problem, and I think that's where the Canadian government needs to act.
But Germany is facing a winter coming up now, and a decision has to be made now. Is this not thus the right decision in the moment?
Well, that's a good point, Paul. That winter is coming up in a mere 5 or so months. We have been calling on the government to do this well before the war in Ukraine began. In fact, I was reviewing some of my public comments on this from well before the war in Ukraine began that called on the government to recognize the threat that Russian energy presented to our European allies. And so there's been plenty of time for the Canadian government, for the Trudeau government, to show the same sense of urgency that the Germans have shown and other Europeans have shown in trying to get off Russian gas. And so instead of approving export permits for up to 2 years, the Canadian government should be expediting the approval and construction of new LNG terminals here in Canada, and that's something that's been missing.
Heather McPherson, you said today in committee that by sending turbines to Germany, Canada is allowing the Russian Federation effectively to weaponize energy around the world. Would you not say Vladimir Putin has already weaponized energy around the world?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not just energy, Paul. I mean, he's weaponized food. He's weaponized the lives of millions of people around the world with food security issues. But what's happening right now with these turbines is, we have a war in Ukraine. We have Ukrainians that are under attack that I think all Canadians have watched as Ukraine stood up for themselves and has fought back, and have been so incredibly moved and have felt in such solidarity with the Ukrainian people as they have fought this battle, this very uneven battle. And the sanction regime that Canada put in place, doesn't do the job we need to do. It doesn't isolate Vladimir Putin. It doesn't isolate the Russian Federation if it is not enforced. And basically, when we flip the switch, the first opportunity, the first time it gets difficult, the Russian government has been trolling the Canadian government on Twitter because this is such a bad decision. This sets such a bad precedent. What are we going to do when Vladimir Putin decides to ask for lifting of sanctions so that he can transport food? What are we going to do when Vladimir Putin doesn't follow through with this? We are basing this whole thing on the assumption that Vladimir Putin is going to live up to his word, that he's going to follow through, that he's going to provide what's required. And we can't make that assumption, because he has lied time and time and time again. That the situation we're in right now, we need to support the Ukrainian people. We need to stop Vladimir Putin. We need to isolate him. We need to put pressure on him. This isn't the right way. But I will say, Germany is facing winter, and we do need to do more to help. Now, we don't have the infrastructure to be sending natural gas to Germany right now. We do have the ability to work with our partners, to work with allies in other countries that do export natural gas to Germany. We can be looking at hydrogen. We know that Germany is very interested in transitioning away from Russian gas. We can help them do that. We can help with that transition, that energy transition, and we should be. This is an important ally for Canada. We have a lot of work that we can be doing with them. But to abandon Ukrainians at this time, to say on one hand that Canada supports Ukraine, that the government supports Ukraine, and then on the other hand do this horrific waiving of these sanctions for 2 years is very, very problematic.
Sure, but the difficulty is, I think everybody agrees, Putin has to be, harmed, I guess, if you want to put it this way, vis-a-vis the sanctions. But if Germany and Germans pay the price, let's look at the price of gas in Canada, for instance, and the uproar over that. If all of a sudden Germans are freezing in the dark this winter, doesn't that risk, the support for Ukraine from Germany? It's a complicated circumstance, right?
Totally, and I totally agree that it is difficult. This is a difficult decision, but there are two things I just want to point out. One is that we don't know that Russia is going to follow through and continue to give natural gas to Germany. We don't have that assurance, right?
But this would take away the excuse, is the argument, right? This would take away Putin's excuse if he, in turn, does that.
He'll come up with another one.
Michael Chong,
he just comes up with another excuse.
Yeah, Paul, I don't think the Canadian government has shown a sense of urgency about increasing oil and gas exports to Europe to displace Russian gas. Here's one example. Minister Wilkinson, when he was at the International Energy Agency's meetings in Paris this past March, only promised an additional 300,000 barrels a day of energy to Europe by year end. First of all, that time frame should be compressed. And secondly, the amount should be at least double that. He indicated at the time that there wasn't sufficient current pipeline capacity to increase that amount, and that was contradicted by the government of Alberta. The government of Alberta clearly stated at the time that there was capacity to transport up to 650,000 additional barrels of energy a day immediately, that the pipeline capacity existed to do that. So that's just one example of how this government, this federal government, is not treating this with the sense of urgency that our allies are asking us to do. Look, the German chancellor is coming to Canada for a reason. We are the 5th largest natural gas producer in the world. And I think the Germans want to put a lot more pressure on the Canadian government to do more to help European democracies wean themselves off of Russian natural gas. And to this point, the Canadian government simply hasn't stepped up to the plate. It's the one big thing we could do to help Europe and to cut off the source of funds that are funding the missiles and the tanks and the weaponry that are raining down upon the Ukrainian people. You know, if you look at the last year and a half since the Biden administration has come into power, the U.S. has provided a total of $7 billion U.S. in military aid to Ukraine. Allies like Canada have contributed a bit more than that. So if you add up the sum total, it's in the low $10 billion range of weaponry that's been provided to Ukraine. In the last 145 days or so since this war has began, the Europeans and others have transferred $100 billion to Russia to pay for this natural gas and oil. And that's why this is such a critical area in which Canada could really help. But it requires a government to wake out of its stupor and to step up to the plate and to do something that could really help our allies. And that is to approve and expedite energy infrastructure, just like the Germans have. Surely Canada construct and build LNG terminals in an emergency like we are. That's still a long-term,
in fairness, that's still a long-term solution. We've run out of time, but I want to give you both a chance. And I respect Michael Chong saying, you know, we wouldn't have gotten to this position if the Conservatives, as you would put it, were running the country. But sometimes you inherit circumstances. So I want to hear from each of you on this, and Heather McPherson, we'll go to you first. What would you do right now then? What would you do given this option right now?
Well, you know, I think the most important thing we need to think about is how we stop the war in Ukraine. And then that is isolating Putin, that is ending his ability to raise funds and to hold the world over a barrel, to blackmail the world using energy, food, whatever the case may be. So right now, we need to find solutions for Germany, and whether that means we increase natural gas exports from other countries that supply gas to Germany, whether we encourage our allies to do that, whether we look at alternatives for energy. You know, I don't think it's legitimate to say that we need to increase our infrastructure right now for this particular problem, because that's years out. That's a years out solution. It's not a solution that will help the German people in 5 months. However, the community has put forward many ideas to the Canadian government, and I don't feel that they have explored those thoroughly. So I think there is other options we can look at. We can look at other sources. We can look at hydrogen. We can look at greening the energy grid. We can look at ways to support Germany by increasing capacity to open up other natural gas reserves that are available.
Michael,
so there is some things we can work on.
We've really run out of time, but I'll give you one sentence if you can be very, very, very brief.
Sure. The Prime Minister needs to treat this as the emergency it is. He needs to state publicly that Canada has a goal of replacing a third of all Russian natural gas in Western Europe. He needs to convene a meeting of European leaders, business leaders here in Canada, and the premiers, and work toward that goal. If Germany can build 2 new LNG terminals in about 12 months, then surely Canada, one of the world's largest energy producers, can do the same to assist our European allies.
All right. On that, thank you both for your time today.